Hey y'all, Jason Kissel here, and we are going to talk about student feedback. I'm going to do this one a little bit different. Instead of jumping to some platforms and showing you just some basic things, I'm just going to kind of talk generally about feedback, why I think it's important, and some aspects of it that I think made a big difference for me as a teacher, and what I think I'd be doing now. So let's jump right into it. The first point that I want to make is that feedback has to include the student. So what I mean by that is if it's just a note or a kind of a static thing where you write feedback and then there's no working loop and there's no action required for the feedback, then it's really kind of a pointless action. I think back to when I was in school and I would receive a standardized test score, or maybe it'd even be broken down into domains, like when I got my ACT score back when I was a kid, right? That's feedback, although not really that helpful to me. Like, I don't know exactly what questions I missed. I don't know why I misunderstood that. I don't have any really tools to improve that besides just going over all of the domain again. And that is a pretty tough task for a student, right? So having feedback that has some type of actionable item, that has some type of loop where the part of the process of completing the assignment is the feedback is extremely valuable. A little bit different shift than traditionally that, like a summative assessment where you write feedback. I could remember writing responses back, and pretty much every time the teacher would say I have poor grammar, and I just would keep writing because that was what I was told. I have poor grammar. I know I have poor grammar. I don't know how to fix it, so I'll just keep writing. That's kind of how I feel about it. Never really included me. It just told me what I did wrong. So with feedback, I think you go with stuff you already know. You don't need to inject a bunch of more stuff, right? Classkick has a really great feedback feature with the hand raising. You can add things to student slides. You can redirect them. I think if you're using Classkick and you don't use that part of the feedback, I think that's a really great step into it, right? You're already using this tool. Your students are already familiar. So, try the feedback portion of Classkick. Same with EdPuzzle, right? If you're using EdPuzzle already, students do poorly on the multiple choice. Well, how can we build in a feedback loop or some type of actionable item for students instead of them just saying, "Well, I got 2 out of 8 on the questions for my EdPuzzle. Done. Let's move on with life," right? Let's think about how we can use that tool. Can we assign a follow-up video, right? Can we give an open-ended response on maybe why things weren't going well? What ways can we create a video and share it with them on EdPuzzle, right? Create one maybe using Screencastify or something, and then make it an EdPuzzle. That would be kind of cool. Of course, those things take time. I understand that, but it's more valuable to the student if it's personalized and the feedback's direct. And then Pear Deck has really great feedback features that they've added recently. They've got this star function when you're in the teacher dashboard, as well as you can type in feedback. You have to direct the students to the feedback. So I kind of like that because let's make it an actionable item. So, if I give them feedback, I want to make sure that they can see it and then they can do something about it, right? So I just encourage you, whatever digital tools you currently use, try to think about how you can build a feedback loop into that. Next, let's see. Delivery is crucial. Okay, so I wrote down some notes here because I don't want to misspeak, but the way that you give your feedback really matters, right? Like, we've all received really harsh criticism. That's absolutely true about us, right? But when it's delivered in a poor way, it doesn't really hit home other than wow, that was really rude, right? And so let's just think about that. Like, we really want to be intentional in how we deliver things to our students, including feedback. So I want to make sure I pull up my notes here because I really don't want to misspeak on what I wanted to say. Yeah, so let me give you a couple examples here. I'm gonna make this screen a little bit bigger. We're gonna try this out. Okay, so how does it feel for you to be strictly monitored, without control, and comfortable in uncomfortable competition? Those are my 3 questions for you. So those are 3 things to be really cautious of when you're giving feedback in your delivery. What's really important with your delivery. So if all your feedback does just makes it feel like all you're doing is watching students all day long, it doesn't really feel like a learning environment. It more feels like you're just the guardian, watching over and waiting for somebody to screw up, which isn't really helpful for a learning environment. How does it feel to be without control, right? If all of your feedback is an attempt to funnel a student into one way of thinking and one process in one direction, granted, we want them all to be going, and learning, but use what a student's strengths are, build on those strengths instead of saying, well, we don't want you to go that route. We all need to go the same route, right? So if there's this attempt to control somebody, that can really hinder the feedback process. And then if feedback feels like competition, right? If in some way you're posting scores, or if the score is directly related to the feedback, and all we're doing when giving feedback is like, well, this isn't as good as something else or better than something else, that puts people in competition, and that's not really what the learning process is about either. It's solely about moving forward and what my content knowledge is, and then learning more, right? So I think the delivery is really important to think about how you're meeting the needs of each student emotionally as well as academically. One quick example to go back into the tech world would be using GoGuardian Teacher, right? I think we need to be extremely cautious with a tool like GoGuardian Teacher. It allows for a lot of control on the teacher end, but if there's no purpose that's given to the students when rolling out a tool like GoGuardian Teacher, or when doing a Pear Deck feedback, I think you could really run into some sticky situations, right, where students don't really get the vision of why this tool is important and why you think it helps the learning process. I would also counter with, if something like GoGuardian Teacher is simply a tool to block websites, I don't think we are meeting its full potential, and I think there's a lot more we can do with that than simply block websites and open new tabs, right? So just consider that when you're thinking about the tools you use and the feedback you give students, formally or informally, and how that maybe comes off to them. All right. One example of a tool, it's a Chrome extension. It's amazing. Try it out. It's called Moat. Moat allows you to add in audio feedback to comments in like Google Docs and Google Slides and Google Sheets. Okay, so if you're having your students work within the Google Workspace ecosystem, then Moat is an amazing tool. I love the idea of giving audio, video feedback very quickly, and Moat does it. Right, Moat gives audio feedback quicker than any other tool. So something to consider would be Moat. Again, we're not going to do a bunch of like tutorials showing you how to add the extension and things like that. That could be a completely different thing. All right, I'm going to blow this thing up. This is a little research done on feedback, and these are Hattie's, John Hattie's scores from Visible Learning, where we're looking at like 0.4 as kind of being that hinge point of like the student, the efficacy score that this is adding to a student's learning, right? So less than 0.4, which this list is way longer, but less than 0.4, it's not adding to students' growth, and greater than 0.4 it is. And you can see like, okay, self-reported grades is very effective, and the jigsaw method is very effective, and teacher credibility is very effective, right? And if you keep going down, you're going to see feedback right here. At a 0.7. So not as effective as some of these other things, but also it has shown in research that it's an effective way to grow students academically, right? So just another thing to think about, like this isn't something that I just came up with in my mind, but there's a lot of research that supports it as well. Cool. All right. Next tool is Screencastify. I think a lot of us are probably familiar with it. Let me give you a couple ideas. One, if you want to do audio feedback that's maybe a little bit different than Moat, you can just record a video with Screencastify, and then you can export the audio, and you can share the audio file instead of the video and the audio. So if you don't want to share a video, there's no purpose for the video, you can just share the audio. That's my first one that I don't think a lot of people recognize. And then the second one is taking the student's work and making a video file of feedback where you're walking through the student's work as you're talking. Put your picture in the bottom corner and send that back. Make it 30 seconds to a minute. Keep it really short so students can kind of consume that, and it's not a 20-minute thing, right? It's hard to consume something like that. And then give an actionable step at the end of that feedback for the student to do, right? So once you give the feedback, give them an actionable step. What if their work is exemplary, right? Give them feedback of how to extend their learning and how to push themselves more, right? There's always an opportunity for them to do something else based on the work that they've done, right? So we want to value the work, and then we want to value what we can do after that work is done. All right, a couple more things about Hattie's research, and I'm not gonna go as much into detail as this as I maybe should, but let's just talk about when you're giving feedback. These are kind of the three questions that you want to be kind of cognizant of why feedback is important, right? Where am I going? What are the goals of this unit? What are the goals of this lesson? What are the goals of this assessment? Why am I giving feedback to this particular student? And what do I want this the outcome almost to be, right? Um, the second step would be just how's the student going to get there? How am I going to help the student get there? So being very vocal and clear about what the goals are for the lesson, what the progress is in the lesson, how we're going to get there, and then what happens when we're done. That is a nice little three-step way of giving feedback to students instead of saying you subtracted wrong here and you added correctly here, right? So a little bit more holistic idea of feedback. Okay, another tool. It's like almost like paid advertising for these guys, although they didn't pay me, so free advertising. Cami is an amazing tool. If you've never used it, basically you pull up anything, it converts it to a PDF. There's ways to just embed comments, text comments, audio comments, video comments, screen recording comments in Cami. I would absolutely be using that if I was a teacher today. Okay. The type of feedback you give is also really important. So think about when you're giving feedback. Is it casual? Is it more like a summative feedback where you're at the end of a unit and you're giving the student like kind of their final feedback for that unit before you move on? Is it a daily feedback loop between you two? Just the type of feedback you give students really matters, and the way you give it really matters. So let me explain that real quick. You want your feedback to be specific. I think that's pretty clear. Like, tell the student exactly what you mean. You want it to be targeted, probably directly related to a standard. Immediate is really important, right? Like, we've all had the teacher, and we've all maybe been the teacher where an assignment sits for a month, and then we give them some vague feedback, and it's like, it literally does nothing. It was a waste of a few hours for me, and the student didn't even read it. Positive is really important, right? We always want to be a positive light. And then iterative meaning that we want it to have some actionable item where the student does it, and then we can reflect on what the student did, and we could keep going back and forth, right? It could be kind of this endless loop if we wanted it to be. Okay, so those are 5 things to really think about when you're giving feedback. And then quick thing, the other side of feedback. Every year I gave my students a survey at the middle of the year and at the end of the year about what I did well, what I didn't do well. I had some check boxes. I loved it being on paper for a few reasons, but I think people believe things are anonymous more on paper than they do digitally, right? So I always gave them a paper feedback, even though I'm like the tech guy, whatever. Let me just share a couple of these and why I think it's really important for it to be the other side, right? Not just me always giving feedback to them, but them also giving me feedback. And the questions would have to change, right? Depending on the level of the student. These are high school students, so they could write pretty full sentences. So you can see here the types of questions I asked. And, these things right here, if you could give Mr. Kissel one piece of serious advice, right there, that question formed a lot of what I thought about over the summer and how I changed things year to year. So this was probably my second or third year of teaching. And then, the thing at the bottom where people felt like maybe they were concerned that they were asking stupid questions, that's something I really had to frame my own brain around. Like, okay, how do I respect everybody, and really learn from that? So that's just one example. And then here's another example. It's nice to see nice things about your teaching, like she finally understood factoring, but it's also nice to see, like, please teach it more than one way. So that comment came up multiple times, and I thought, okay, I need to do this. Like, I need to learn how to do this. Maybe I don't know how to do this, but I need to learn how to do this, right? So I hope that helps you a little bit frame your mind around feedback. I know it's not a specific tool, but there are lots of digital tools out there that will do it and do it really well. So please let me know if you have questions on feedback, or how it could be part of a process that you kind of take and make your own within your classroom.